Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to stand in the House today to commemorate the month of May as Asian Heritage Month. Asian Heritage Month is an opportunity for all Ontarians to learn about the many achievements and contributions of Canadians of Asian, including South Asian descent, who throughout our history have done so much to make Canada the amazing country we share today. We can be inspired by the long and rich history of these Canadians who continue to enrich our country. As Canadians, we are deeply proud of the free and pluralistic country we have built. It's why we dedicate the month of May to pay tribute to the Asian community, which includes over 30 countries that make up East, Southeast, and South Asian communities, for their significant cultural, economic, historical contributions to our land. As Ontario's Minister of Education, I believe it's important to recognize and celebrate those contributions in Ontario's school curriculum. Asian Canadian history is part of our collective Canadian history, and as such, Mr. Speaker, this should not be highlighted only during the month of May, but integrated throughout the school year. Ontario's classrooms must provide students with learning opportunities on how to confront and combat racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and hate. This demands frank and honest discussions about our past, where students can learn about and understand the long-standing impact of the Chinese head tax imposed on Chinese immigrants at the turn of the century, or the Japanese internments during the Second World War, or Canada's refusal to accept the South Asian immigrants who arrived in Vancouver in the spring and summer of 1914 aboard the SS Komagatu Maru. Mr. Speaker, it means teaching children to love our country while we acknowledge shameful incidents within our history. And of course, it means understanding the world in which we live, including speaking up in defense of minority groups such as the Uyghurs facing systematic persecution by the Communist Chinese state. It's why the country works to ensure the curriculum is inclusive, reflects the diversity of Ontario's population, and promotes understanding and inclusion. This learning begins in kindergarten and continues in elementary school throughout various grades on a number of subjects. Mr. Speaker, at the heart of our public education system is a shared responsibility and role to safeguard the success and well-being of all students, irrespective of their race, creed, or faith. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and condemn the concerning spike of anti-Asian hate, including physical assaults against children and elderly people that have occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic, a sad reality that has existed for generations, however tragically amplified today. These racist attacks are unacceptable and an affront to the values our country upholds. Motivated by hate and fanned by the COVID-19 pandemic, this racism has negatively impacted the mental and physical health, well-being and safety of educators, of students, families and communities of Asian descent. Every student in Ontario has an unassailable right to feel safe and protected at school so that they can reach their full potential and achieve lifelong success. As Minister, I'm committed to upholding and promoting human rights and eliminating hatred, racism and discrimination in our schools. It's imperative that we as a legislature remain steadfast in that commitment to work with our communities, our families, school boards and education partners to create safe, respectful, inclusive spaces for students to learn, interact and develop. Last July, our government announced changes to the education system that will break down barriers for Indigenous, Black and racialized students who live, including those who live in low-income households, those with disability and special education needs, so that they can succeed. As part of this action, we're moving forward with eliminating and ending grade 9 streaming into applied and academic courses, proposing to eliminate discretionary suspensions for students, strengthening sanctions for educators who engage in behavior of racist nature, and providing teachers with additional anti-racism and anti-discrimination training. Well, I'm proud to tell you that this has enabled the funding of new community organizations, including those that support Asian communities directly through culturally relevant mental health supports, educator and parent resources to address the anti-Asian racism phenomena that we're seeing at home and abroad. Today, I want to highlight the $6.4 million that the Ontario government is directing towards numerous third-party initiatives and partners to protect against racism and hate. It includes funding to community organizations to address anti-Asian hate, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia, among others, as well as to support for newcomer parents and families to enhance access to school and community resources and culturally appropriate mental health for Asian youth, students, and families. Specifically, $340,000 targeted to the Asian community partners to support initiatives that break down those barriers to success, that support inclusivity and the child's mental health. These initiatives will help ensure that students learn in more inclusive classrooms, that they're supported by their educators and their communities. In opposition to this rising hate and in the defense of inclusion, Ontario is investing in targeted supports to counter racism in our schools, to support educator training and professional development, to provide family services in heritage languages, including to and for newcomers to Canada, and mental health supports directly for students victimized by the prejudice within our schools. We're proud to announce $140,000 to the Hong Fook Mental Health Association to provide mental health supports for Asian students, for families and teachers, including offering counseling and workshops in Mandarin, Cantonese, and English. In addition, through the Safe Restart Agreement, we're partnering with community groups that include the Chinese-Canadian National Council for Social Justice that's receiving $50,000 to develop online resources to help Chinese-Canadian households engage their children from grades 3 to 5 in discussions about racism, part of a broader effort to change the culture within our households through our classroom. We're providing $10,000 to the Asian Canadian Educators Network to develop a series of professional development workshops about anti-Asian racism for schools and boards in Ontario to better empower our frontline educators to oppose this racism of all kinds, and $140,000 to Community Family Services of Ontario to deliver resources and supports relevant to pandemic-induced issues and risks faced by newcomers and East Asian Ontario families. Mr. Speaker, we are proud of these significant investments because, without question, all of Ontario's students deserve the opportunity to succeed and flourish at school. And this has always been our pledge, as well as my personal commitment as minister, to effect real, genuine change for our students so that they can thrive, reach their potential, and succeed in the real world. Our government will not tolerate racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, Islamophobia, or hate in any form in any school. Through these initiatives, we will ensure students from all walks of life are prepared for lifelong success. All students must feel welcomed and afforded an equal opportunity to succeed. As Minister, I want all of Ontario's Indigenous, Black, and racialized students, including those of Asian descent, to know that they are valued and respected. We will stand with all students on this journey to advance respect, dignity, and opportunity. We will continue to build a world-class education system that has high expectations for our students, regardless of their social identities, and will help to ensure equitable opportunities and meaningful experiences and successful outcomes for those students. The proud history of Asian immigration and tragically discrimination in Canada can be traced back to more than 150 years ago, when Chinese workers arrived on the West Coast and joined others to construct the nation-building CP Railway. Many lost their lives in an endeavour that saw them treated unfairly and inhumanely, treated as if they were expendable. Mr. Speaker, the incredible sacrifice of these individuals and their families, sons and fathers, mothers and daughters, were not appreciated or rewarded by Canadian lawmakers at that time. Instead, Canada restricted immigration from China through the head tax, which was actually abolished through the Chinese Exclusion Act and aimed to prevent nearly all Chinese immigrants to Canada. Mr. Speaker, the Chinese exclusion remained in effect until 1947. These past and present failings must be acknowledged and confronted, as I've noted. And we must be unyielding in our motivation to honour the sacrifice of those pioneers, those newcomers who chose Canada and helped to shape our history. It is for our forefathers and mothers and for young people today, the next generation, our students, that we must keep building a more welcoming, free, and pluralistic society, one that recognizes that all people are created equally, deserving of love and respect. That work must continue as we confront a rising hate and racism against Canadians of Asian ancestry. It was the previous Conservative government of Prime Minister Stephen Harper that acknowledged the injustice inflicted on Chinese Canadians with an apology for the deeply discriminatory head tax. In Prime Minister's words, he said, quote, "This was a grave injustice and one that we are morally obligated to acknowledge," end quote. It was the government of Progressive Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney who recognized and apologized for the Canadian state's mistreatment and racist actions against Japanese families. At the time, Prime Minister Mulroney said, and I quote, "We cannot change the past, but we must, as a nation, have the courage to face up to these historical facts," end quote. Indeed, it was just last month that we celebrated Journey to Freedom Day, a day marking the welcoming of more than 60,000 Vietnamese refugees fleeing war and persecution by communists in their home country. More than 34,000 of those refugees were privately sponsored by charities, religious organizations, and of course, Canadian families. It was an impressive show of compassion and love for their fellow men that drove Canadians and that government to welcome such a significant number of refugees. These moments should remind us that what our country can be at its best. Asian Canadians not only physically helped to build this great country, but they also culturally enriched its diversity, which has become an important characteristic of our nation. It is why we undertake to better reflect the positive contributions Asian and racialized Canadians have made to the development of our country, in many cases even before Canada's Confederation. The experiences of each family and individual vary, but the promise that Canada offers remains the same. The promise of a better life steeped in democratic tradition. The foundational principle of freedom and equality for this generation and for the next. This month, let's work hard to counter all forms of hate, and most especially celebrate the rich diversity of Asian culture and history and contribute to this beautiful and the success of this beautiful country, Canada. Thank you.
Thank you.